My name is Simone. When I was 9, my parents told me to wait by a mall fountain while they bought ice cream. They never came back. I sat there for 6 hours before police took me away. 23 years later, those same parents showed up at my adoptive father's funeral, demanding his house and his $6 million estate. They thought I was weak. They were wrong. Before I tell you how I sent my own parents to prison, tell me where you're watching from. The Chicago sky was bruised purple, swollen with rain that never quite fell, like it was holding its breath. It matched the way I felt. 3 days had passed since Elijah Henderson died, and I still hadn't found a place inside myself where the loss could land. Grief doesn't always come as tears. Sometimes it arrives as pressure, as silence, as the inability to breathe all the way in. I stood beside the open grave, my boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. The ground was soft from the storm that had passed overnight. The scent of rain and soil mixed with cut grass and cold stone. There were only a handful of people there. Mr. Miller, our neighbor, who used to play chess with Dad every Sunday morning on the porch. Gable, the librarian who quietly set aside mystery novels she thought Dad would like. A pastor who barely knew him, but spoke kindly anyway. That was it. And that was exactly how Elijah Henderson would have wanted it. To the rest of the world, he was just a quiet man who fixed boilers at the elementary school and drove a rusted Ford truck from the 90s. He wore the same coat every winter and never complained. He didn't draw attention to himself. He didn't brag. He didn't explain. To me, he was everything. He was the man who found me when no one else wanted to look. The man who gave a terrified child a home without asking for gratitude. The man who never once made me feel like I owed him for saving my life. The pastor closed his Bible and bowed his head. "We commit his body to the earth," he said gently. That was when the engine noise cut through the quiet. At first, I thought it was thunder. Then it got louder. 3 black SUVs tore down the gravel path like they were late for something important. Tires sprayed mud. Engines roared. One of them swerved around a hearse parked further down the lane like it was an inconvenience. They came to a screeching halt, right on the grass. My stomach dropped. I knew who they were before the doors opened. Nightmares have a way of keeping faces fresh. The driver's door of the lead SUV flew open. Marcus stepped out. My biological father. Older now. Heavier. But still carrying that same unearned arrogance I remembered from childhood. He adjusted his tie in the side mirror before even looking at the grave. Then Latoya stepped out of the passenger side. My biological mother. She was dressed like this was a fashion event, not a burial. A black sequined dress that caught the gray light. A dramatic hat, with a veil so large, it looked theatrical. Not a single tear in sight. Behind them came Trey, my brother, the golden child, the one who got ice cream while I got left behind. He leaned against the hood, scrolling his phone, bored already. And then there was Ashley, Trey's wife. White, blonde, perfect hair, perfect makeup, expensive heels sinking into cemetery grass, like she was stepping in trash. She lifted her phone immediately. I saw the reflection of a ring light in her eyes. She was live streaming. They walked toward the grave like they owned the ground beneath it. Latoya let out a wail so loud it startled the birds from the trees. It was high-pitched, dramatic, and completely empty. "Oh, Elijah," she cried, throwing her arms wide. "My dear friend, how could you leave us so soon?" I stepped forward and blocked her path. "Do not touch him," I said. My voice shook, but I didn't move. "You do not know him." Latoya froze mid-performance. She lifted the veil and looked at me. Her eyes were dry. "Oh, Simone, baby," she said, instantly soft, syrupy. "Is that any way to talk to your mother?" "This man was my father," I said. "You are strangers." Marcus stepped closer, looming over me the way he used to when I was small. "Watch your mouth," he growled. "We're your flesh and blood. We drove 6 hours to make sure things are handled properly." Ashley laughed behind her phone. "This place is disgusting," she said to the camera. I thought there was money. Why is he being buried in a dump? Something inside me snapped into place. A calm, cold clarity. I looked at all of them. At the rented luxury SUVs. At the greed barely disguised as grief. At the entitlement. They thought I was still 9 years old. They thought I was still waiting on a bench. They had no idea who I'd become. And they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. If you're locked in already, hit like. If you've ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours, type "still here" in the comments. I hadn't seen Marcus and LaToya in 23 years. But my body recognized them instantly. Trauma doesn't forget faces. It doesn't forget voices either. The sound of LaToya saying my name the way she just had, sweet and possessive, hit something deep and ugly in my chest. "Mother," she'd said, like the word was a title she'd earned just by surviving. I stood my ground in front of the grave. The pastor had stepped back, uncertain. Mr. Miller looked like he wanted to disappear into the dirt. Ashley's phone stayed trained on my face, the little red live icon glowing like an accusation. Marcus cleared his throat. "We didn't come to argue," he said, already lying. "We came to pay respects and discuss arrangements." "There's nothing to discuss," I replied. "The service is over. You should leave." Trey finally looked up from his phone. He squinted at me like he was trying to place an old memory that didn't matter much anymore. "Damn," he said. "You grew up. That was it." No apology. No recognition of what they'd done. Just mild surprise. Like I was a background character who'd wandered back into frame. LaToya clasped her hands dramatically. "Simone, sweetheart, we know things ended. Awkwardly. But families have disagreements. What matters is coming together now." "Disagreements," I repeated. My mind flashed back to the mall. The smell of pretzels. The sticky tile beneath my sneakers. The way the fountain sounded cheerful while my stomach twisted in on itself. 6 hours. No phone call. No police report from them. Nothing. They didn't leave me by accident. They left me because I was inconvenient. "You abandoned me," I said. Calmly. Clearly. Loud enough that Ashley's audience could hear. Marcus scoffed. "That's ancient history. You were always dramatic." There it was. The same dismissal. The same erasure. Ashley chimed in, still filming. "So you're saying you were homeless or something? That's awful. But we're here about the estate. Elijah was very successful, right?" Mr. Miller flinched. I turned to her. "Turn that off." She smiled wider. "This is public. So is child abandonment," I said. The smile faltered. LaToya's eyes hardened. "Watch yourself. You don't know what you're accusing us of." "I do," I replied. Because I lived it. The air felt thick. Electric. People were watching now. Not just online. The few mourners left hadn't moved. Even the pastor stayed, frozen, sensing that something important was unfolding. Marcus stepped closer. "We're not here to relive the past. We're here because we've been informed that Elijah Henderson left a substantial estate, and as Simone's biological parents, we're entitled to." I laughed. It slipped out before I could stop it. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. "Entitled?" I said. "You left me on a bench. You don't get to inherit the man who saved me." Trey sighed, irritated. "Look, this doesn't have to get ugly. We can handle this privately. Lawyers, paperwork. You get something. We get something." That was the moment I knew. They hadn't come to mourn. They hadn't come to reconcile. They hadn't even come to pretend they cared. They came because someone told them Elijah had money, and they assumed I was weak enough to give it to them. Ashley lowered her phone slightly. "So what are we talking about here? A house? Investments? Trusts?" I stepped aside from the grave, placing my hand gently on the casket. "One last time. This conversation is over," I said. "Leave." Marcus's face darkened. "You don't get to tell us what to do." I met his gaze. For the first time in my life, I didn't look away. "Yes," I said, I do. Latoya stepped forward, voice dropping low and venomous. You think you're better than us now because some old man felt sorry for you? The word sorry burned. He didn't feel sorry for me, I said. He chose me. That silence afterward was loud. Trey shifted uncomfortably. Ashley muttered something to her viewers and ended the live. Marcus straightened his jacket. Fine, he said. We'll let the courts decide. I nodded. Please do. They left in a fury of gravel and exhaust, their SUVs tearing up the path the same way they'd arrived. The quiet that followed felt fragile but necessary, like the moment after a storm breaks something open instead of destroying it. I stood there shaking, grief and adrenaline colliding in my chest. Mr. Miller approached slowly. You all right, Simone? I nodded, though I wasn't sure it was true. The pastor touched my shoulder gently. Your father would be proud of you, Father. The words settled into me, solid and real. That night, alone in Elijah's house, I sat at the dining table he'd built with his own hands. The wood was worn smooth from decades of quiet meals and folded newspapers. On the table sat a manila envelope, my name written in his careful handwriting. Inside were documents, deeds, trust papers, and a letter. Simone, if you're reading this, it means the people who failed you may have come looking for what they didn't earn. I prepared for that. Everything I own is protected. And so are you. My hands trembled as I turned the page. They may think you're alone. You're not. And they may think you're unprepared. You aren't. At the bottom was the name of a law firm and a note in bold, do not negotiate. I exhaled for the first time that day. Elijah hadn't just saved me as a child. He'd protected me as an adult, and my parents had no idea what they'd just walked into. If this part hit close to home, type, they came back in the comments. I didn't open the rest of the envelope right away. I sat at Elijah's dining table for a long time. The letter folded in my hands like it might disappear if I looked away. The house was quiet in the way only old homes get after dark. Not empty, just settled. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily, marking time without urgency. For the first time since the cemetery, I let myself cry. Not the kind of crying people expect. No sobbing, no gasping breaths, just tears sliding down my face while my shoulders stayed perfectly still. I'd learned that trick young. Cry without drawing attention, cry without being inconvenient. But this time, I didn't wipe them away. Elijah's handwriting blurred slightly as I unfolded the second page. I know you don't like surprises. The letter continued. So, I'm going to explain everything clearly. The way you prefer. That alone broke something open in me. He'd always noticed. When you were 14, Marcus tried to contact me through a cousin. He wanted to know if you were worth anything yet. I didn't tell you then because you were healing. But I started preparing after that. My stomach tightened. 14. That was the year I stopped having nightmares. The year I finally believed I wasn't going to be sent away again. Elijah had been protecting me even then, quietly. Without ever making me feel like I was being guarded, I consulted attorneys, accountants, not because I planned to die early, but because some people don't deserve access to what they abandon. Blood isn't a contract. I let out a shaky breath. Everything is in your name. The house, the investments, the accounts. There is no legal pathway for them to touch it. I made sure of that. I closed my eyes. For years, I'd lived with the low-level fear that my biological family would show up one day and take something else from me. That fear had lived in my body even when my mind refused to acknowledge it. Elijah had seen it, and he'd done something about it. The firm listed below already has instructions. They know who you are. They know who they are. If your parents challenge anything, do not engage directly. Let professionals handle it. You don't owe anyone explanations. I laughed softly at that. He knew me too well. Explaining had always been my reflex. My shield. My way of trying to make people reasonable. One more thing. The letter said. There's a file in the safe. You'll know which one. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. But if they push, you should. That sentence sat heavy. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. My hands weren't shaking anymore. Something had shifted. I stood and walked down the hallway to Elijah's study. The room smelled like old paper and lemon polish. The safe was tucked behind a bookshelf, exactly where it had always been. He'd shown it to me once, casually, like it wasn't important. I opened it. Inside were neatly organized folders. Insurance documents, property records, and one red folder, thicker than the rest. I didn't open it yet. Some truths need timing. That night, I slept in the guest room, the one that had been mine since I was 10. The same quilt, the same window view. I hadn't slept there since I moved out years ago, but my body recognized the space immediately. I slept deeply. The next morning, the phone rang at 8:17 a.m. Unknown number. I answered. "This is Carter and Wells," a man said calmly. "Is this Simone Henderson?" "Yes. This is Andrew Carter. Elijah was a client of ours for many years. He asked us to contact you immediately following his service." Of course he did. Andrew explained the basics. The trust structure, the legal firewalls, the anticipated challenges. He spoke with the confidence of someone who had already won. "They will contest," he said plainly. "People like this always do." "I know," I replied. "We are prepared," he said. "We just need your authorization to proceed exactly as outlined." I didn't hesitate. "Do it," I said. By noon, Marcus had left 3 voicemails. The first was furious. The second was threatening. The third was suddenly reasonable. "Simone," he said, his voice oily and controlled. "We don't need to involve lawyers. Families handle things internally. Call me." I didn't. Latoya followed with a text. "You're embarrassing us. People are asking questions." Good. Ashley tagged me on social media that afternoon, posting a blurry screenshot from the cemetery with a caption about family disputes and greed poisoning relationships. I didn't respond. I forwarded everything to Andrew. That evening, I finally opened the red folder. Inside were documents I hadn't expected. Police reports from years ago, the mall, the day they left me. I stared at the date. They had reported me missing 6 hours after I was found. The report was incomplete, sloppy, inconsistent. Attached was a note from Elijah. "I requested these records years ago. The timeline doesn't match their story. If they try to paint themselves as victims, this matters." My throat tightened. He'd known. He'd always known. There were also financial records. Bank statements from that year. A withdrawal made the same day I was abandoned. Cash. Enough to cover a weekend getaway. They hadn't panicked. They'd gone on vacation. I sat back slowly, the weight of it pressing into my chest. This wasn't negligence. It was choice. For the first time, I felt something sharper than grief. Resolve. If you're still with me, and you feel that slow burn building, type "I see it now" in the comments. The lawsuit arrived on a Tuesday morning, thick and formal, delivered by courier like it was supposed to intimidate me by sheer weight alone. Marcus and Latoya Dalton versus Simone Henderson. Seeing their names printed above mine made my stomach tighten. But not the way it used to. This time, it wasn't fear. It was recognition. The pattern was familiar. They weren't trying to reconcile. They were trying to overwhelm. The filing alleged emotional manipulation, elder abuse, fraud. They claimed Elijah had been coerced, that I'd isolated him, that I'd poisoned him against his real family. Real. That word, again. I read every page slowly, methodically. Not because I needed to understand it, but because I wanted to feel how different I was now. Years ago, something like this would have sent me spiraling, drafting long explanations in my head, rehearsing how I'd defend myself if anyone asked. Now, I felt oddly calm. Andrew Carter called an hour later. "They've overplayed their hand," he said. No hesitation, no concern. They're relying on emotional narrative, not evidence. And we have evidence. I glanced at the red folder sitting on my desk. So what happens next? I asked. We respond, Andrew said. And then we let them talk themselves into consequences. The phrase stayed with me. Let them talk. That afternoon, Marcus called again. This time, he left a voicemail that sounded almost reasonable. Simone, we can still fix this, he said. Lawyers complicate things. You know your mother's health isn't great. Do you really want to drag this out? There it was. Guilt, repackaged as concern. LaToya followed with a message an hour later. We raised you. You owe us respect. I stared at the words for a long time. Then I deleted the message. Andrew had warned me not to engage. He didn't need to explain why. Engaging gives people like them oxygen. It gives them a sense of influence. Silence starves them. The formal response went out 2 days later. It was concise, precise, merciless. Every claim they made was countered with documentation, dates, records, third-party verification, the police report timeline, the financial withdrawal, the gap between abandonment and action. There was no anger in the language, just facts. That was the part they didn't expect. People like Marcus and LaToya thrived on emotional chaos, on confrontation, on shouting matches. They could twist into stories where they were the injured party. Facts don't argue. Facts sit there and wait. A week later, Ashley went live again. This time, she cried. She talked about family betrayal and being cut out for money. She talked about how some people never let go of childhood resentment. The comments weren't going the way she'd hoped. People were asking questions. Specific questions. Why was Simone left alone as a child? Why didn't the parents report her missing immediately? Why did the money withdrawals line up with that weekend? Ashley ended the stream early. The court scheduled a preliminary hearing. Andrew told me I didn't need to attend, but I chose to. Not because I wanted to confront them, because I wanted to watch them realize something had changed. Marcus arrived in a tailored suit, confidence still intact. LaToya wore black again, face carefully arranged into an expression of wounded dignity. Trey sat behind them, scrolling his phone like this was an inconvenience. When they saw me, Marcus's mouth tightened. I didn't acknowledge them. That was the first crack. Their attorney spoke first, painting a picture of grieving parents pushed out by a manipulative adoptee. He spoke eloquently, emotionally. Then Andrew stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pace. He simply introduced exhibits, timeline discrepancies, financial records, police documentation, witness statements from mall employees who still remembered the crying child by the fountain. The courtroom shifted. LaToya's lawyer objected repeatedly, overruled, again and again. When the judge finally spoke, her tone was measured but unmistakably cold. I have serious concerns, she said. Not only about the merits of this case, but about the conduct surrounding the original incident. Marcus leaned forward, suddenly alert. The judge continued. This court will require a full review of the abandonment timeline, including why a missing child report was delayed. LaToya's face drained of color. For the first time, I saw fear there. Not for me, for themselves. Outside the courtroom, Marcus tried to speak to me. You think you've won something, he said quietly. You don't know what you're doing. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing. I know exactly what I'm doing, I said. I'm telling the truth, he scoffed. But there was no confidence left in it. They'd come expecting a frightened child. They'd found an adult with receipts. And the truth was only just getting started. If you're still here, and watching this unfold, with that quiet sense of justice clicking into place, type, they underestimated me. In the comments, the first call came 3 days after the hearing. It wasn't from Marcus or LaToya. It was from Andrew. They're panicking, he said without preamble. And when people like this panic, they start making mistakes. I was in Elijah's kitchen, the late afternoon light stretching across the counter like it had nowhere else to be. I'd been scrubbing a mug absent-mindedly, lost in thought, when Andrew's words snapped me back into focus. "What kind of mistakes?" I asked. "The kind that involve lying to the wrong people," he said. "And forgetting that paper trails don't disappear just because you pretend they never mattered." After the preliminary hearing, the court ordered a deeper review of the original abandonment incident. Not just the police report, but related records, credit card statements, travel logs, hotel receipts, anything that could establish intent. Marcus and LaToya's lawyer had tried to block it. The judge denied the motion without hesitation. That was when the past stopped being theoretical. It became evidence. Andrew forwarded me a summary later that evening. I sat at the dining table, the same one where Elijah used to read the paper every morning, and read slowly. The weekend I was left at the mall, Marcus and LaToya checked into a resort 2 hours away. 2 nights, paid in cash. No child listed on the reservation. No emergency contact. No calls to police until well after I'd already been picked up by authorities. It wasn't neglect. It was a decision. Worse, there was more. LaToya had called her sister that night. The call log still existed, recorded and archived by the carrier. The transcript had been recovered. "She'll be fine," LaToya said in it. "Someone will deal with it. I can't do this anymore." I read that line 3 times. Someone will deal with it. That someone had been a police officer, a social worker, a stranger, anyone but them. I felt something heavy settle in my chest, but it wasn't sadness. It was clarity. This wasn't about money. It never had been. It was about control. They hadn't come back into my life because they loved me. They'd come back because they thought they could still rewrite the story, that they could frame themselves as victims of circumstance instead of architects of harm. The court didn't see it that way. Neither did the prosecutor who was quietly assigned to review the abandonment case once the judge flagged it. That part hadn't been public yet. Marcus and LaToya didn't know. Not at first. They found out the hard way. 2 weeks later, Ashley went live again. Her tone was different this time. Defensive. Brittle. She talked about old misunderstandings and context being ignored. She accused the legal system of bias. She accused me of manipulation. She cried again, but the comments had turned. People were asking harder questions now. Not emotional ones. Practical ones. Why didn't you report your child missing immediately? Why did you go on vacation the same weekend? Why are there call transcripts? Ashley tried to pivot, tried to shut it down. But once the internet smells blood, it doesn't let go. Trey called me that night. It was the first time he'd ever called me directly. "You don't have to do this," he said, voice low. "They're scared." "Good," I replied. He exhaled sharply. "They're our parents." I didn't soften my voice. They were supposed to be mine too. Silence. "They're talking about settling," he said finally, walking away, dropping the suit. "That's between them and their lawyer," I said. "Not me." "You could make this stop," he pressed. I thought about Elijah, about the letter, about the red folder, about the judge's voice when she said she had concerns. "No," I said. "I couldn't, and I meant it, because this wasn't revenge. This was accountability finally catching up." The prosecutor's office moved faster than anyone expected. Once the abandonment records were verified, they reopened the case. Not as a family dispute, as a crime, child abandonment resulting in endangerment. The statute of limitations hadn't expired. That was the part Marcus and LaToya never checked. They assumed time had erased their choices. Time had preserved them. Andrew called me the morning the charges were filed. "They've been notified," he said. "And Simone? This part matters. You didn't push for this. The court did." I closed my eyes. For the first time since this started, I felt something close to relief. Not because they were being punished, because the truth was finally standing on its own. Marcus called that afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. LaToya texted, "Please, we can talk." I didn't respond. I wasn't withholding forgiveness. I was refusing to interfere with justice. When the news broke, it was quiet. A short article. No names in the headline. Just facts. Reopened case. New evidence. Charges pending. Ashley deleted her social media the same day. Trey stopped calling, and I sat alone in Elijah's living room, listening to the clock tick, feeling the strange stillness that comes when something long buried finally reaches the surface. The past hadn't gone away, it had waited, and now it was done waiting. If this part made your chest feel tight in that familiar way, type "the truth" always comes out in the comments. The knock came at 6:30 in the morning. I wasn't asleep. I hadn't been sleeping much since the hearing, not because I was afraid, but because my body was adjusting to something unfamiliar. Stillness. When you've lived your whole life waiting for the next hit, calm can feel louder than chaos. I knew who it was before I heard the voices. Marcus and LaToya were arrested separately. No dramatic raid, no spectacle, just process, just procedure, just the law doing what it should have done decades ago. Andrew called me 15 minutes later. "They've been taken in," he said. "Charges are official. Bail hearing later today." I sat at the kitchen table and let that sentence exist without reacting to it. Taken in. It sounded small for something that had rearranged my entire life. News outlets picked it up by noon. Not sensationally. No mugshots splashed across screens. Just facts laid out plainly. Abandonment. Endangerment. Reopened case based on newly verified evidence. Prosecutors declined to comment further. Marcus's name was suddenly attached to words he couldn't talk his way out of. LaToya's performance didn't work on judges. The masks came off quickly after that. At the bail hearing, Marcus didn't look at anyone. Not the judge. Not the gallery. Not even his own attorney. He sat rigid, jaw clenched, like if he stayed perfectly still, the moment might pass him by. LaToya cried. Not the controlled, performative crying she'd perfected over the years. This was messy, desperate. The kind of crying that comes when the audience is gone and the script stops working. The judge listened, asked questions, reviewed timelines, then denied bail. The sound LaToya made then wasn't grief, it was disbelief. I wasn't in the room, but Andrew described it later with clinical precision. He didn't need to dramatize it. The facts were enough. When people who've never faced consequences finally do, they don't react with insight, they react with shock. Trey called me that night. He sounded smaller than I remembered, less certain. "They're saying it's your fault," he said quietly. I closed my eyes. "Of course they are. They say you could stop this if you wanted to." I didn't answer right away. "Trey," I said finally, "this isn't something I started. It's something they finished." Silence stretched between us. "I don't know what to do," he said. "For once," I replied gently. "Neither did I." That was the last time we spoke. The weeks that followed were surreal. Court dates, filings, statements. Everything moved slowly, deliberately, like the system was taking its time to get it right. I wasn't asked to testify yet. The evidence spoke clearly enough on its own. The phone records, the financial withdrawals, the delayed report, the vacation receipts. Patterns don't argue, they accumulate. Ashley reactivated her account briefly, posting a single statement about family matters and respecting privacy. The comments were turned off. She disappeared again. I felt no satisfaction watching any of it unfold. No triumph, no vindication, just a deep, settling certainty that the truth no longer needed me to carry it. That was the unexpected part. For so long, the weight of what happened had lived entirely inside me. It had shaped my choices, my caution, my sense of self. I'd carried it alone because no one else would. Now it was external, documented, recognized. I started sleeping better. Not deeply, not immediately, but without jolting awake at imagined sounds. My body began to understand that the danger wasn't abstract anymore. It had been named, contained. Justice, I realized, isn't loud. It's stabilizing. One afternoon, I went back to the mall. I hadn't planned to. I was driving past it on my way home from a meeting with Andrew when my hands tightened on the steering wheel, and I pulled in almost without thinking. The fountain was still there, smaller than I remembered. I stood where I'd sat all those years ago. I listened to the water, watched families pass, kids whining, parents distracted, life moving on, without noticing the weight of that moment. I didn't feel anger, I felt distance, like I was looking at a photograph instead of a wound. That's when I knew something had shifted for good. Marcus and LaToya eventually took a plea. Reduced charges, formal admission, court-mandated counseling, public record, no prison sentence. Some people might call that a failure of justice. I didn't. Justice isn't about how much someone suffers. It's about whether reality is acknowledged. They stood in a courtroom and admitted they left me behind. Not accidentally, not temporarily, intentionally. That admission mattered more than any punishment ever could. I went home that night and sat at Elijah's desk. The red folder, finally empty of secrets. I placed the letter back inside the safe and closed it gently. That chapter was finished. The past had spoken. And for the first time, I didn't feel like it was speaking through me. If you're still here and you felt that quiet shift from survival to grounding, type, I feel the shift in the comments. When the legal process slowed, something unexpected happened. So did my life. For months, everything had been measured in filings, deadlines, and updates. Even healing had felt procedural. Step by step, documented, controlled, but once the noise faded, I was left with a question I hadn't prepared for. Who am I when nothing is chasing me? It sounds simple. It isn't. For most of my life, my identity had been built around vigilance. I was observant, careful, good at reading rooms, good at predicting reactions. Those skills kept me safe once. They also kept me small. Without the constant background threat, those instincts didn't disappear. They just had nowhere to land. I noticed it in small moments. At the grocery store, I'd catch myself scanning faces, anticipating confrontation that never came. When my phone rang, my chest would tighten before I even looked at the screen. When someone asked a neutral question, my mind would rush to construct a careful answer, one that couldn't be used against me. Nothing happened. Again and again. My body took longer than my mind to believe it. Andrew noticed the shift before I did. During one of our final meetings, he closed the folder, leaned back in his chair, and said, "You know, you don't actually need me anymore." The statement startled me, not because I doubted him, but because I hadn't realized how much I'd anchored myself to having a defender, a professional buffer between me and the world. "Is that good?" I asked. He smiled slightly. "It's normal. It's also earned." Earned. That word landed differently now. Not as pressure, not as obligation, as acknowledgement. I started noticing how much of my daily life had been shaped by caution rather than preference. Where I lived, how I dressed, the way I spoke, even the way I laughed, all calibrated to avoid drawing attention. One afternoon, I stood in front of my closet and realized I didn't actually like half of what I owned. Not because it was ugly or uncomfortable, but because it wasn't chosen. It was safe, neutral, invisible. I donated most of it. The first time I wore something bright in public, my heart raced. Not from fear, but from exposure. Being seen without apology felt like stepping into cold water. Shocking at first. Then, exhilarating. I didn't rush this part. Healing, I was learning, isn't about dramatic reinvention. It's about quiet permission. Permission to want things. Permission to change your mind. Permission to take up space without justification. I went back to school part-time. Not because I needed credentials, but because I was curious. I took classes that had nothing to do with practicality, philosophy, ethics, narrative psychology. I wanted to understand how stories shape people and how people survive when their stories are taken from them. sitting in those classrooms, surrounded by people who didn't know my history. I felt something loosen in my chest. I wasn't someone's abandoned child. I wasn't a plaintiff. I wasn't a case study. I was just Simone. That anonymity felt like freedom. My relationship with Trey dissolved quietly. No confrontation. No final argument. Just distance growing where obligation used to live. He sent one last message. Months later. I hope you're okay. I stared at it for a long time before replying. I am. And I was. The strangest part was how peace arrived without fanfare. No milestone. No clear moment of arrival. Just a gradual realization that my days no longer revolved around the past. I stopped rehearsing conversations that never happened. Stopped anticipating betrayal as a default outcome. Stopped assuming calm was temporary. One night, lying in bed, I noticed something else. I wasn't tired in the old way. Not the bone-deep exhaustion of surviving. Just regular tired. The kind that comes from living a full day. That distinction mattered. I went back to the fountain one last time. Not because I needed closure, but because I wanted to measure the distance. The mall hadn't changed much. New stores, new signs, same sound of water. I stood there briefly, then walked away without ceremony. I didn't need to reclaim the space. I had already reclaimed myself. If you're watching this and you're in that quiet phase after the chaos, where things feel unfamiliar because they're finally safe, type, "This part is hard," in the comments. Peace didn't feel real at first. It felt like a pause, like something the universe might take back if I moved the wrong way or said the wrong thing. I treated calm like fragile glass, careful not to touch it too directly. That's what survival teaches you. Good moments are borrowed. Safety is conditional. Comfort always comes with fine print. It took time to unlearn that. The first sign that something had changed wasn't emotional. It was physical. I stopped clenching my jaw without realizing it. My shoulders stopped creeping up toward my ears. I didn't flinch when someone raised their voice across a room that had nothing to do with me. My body was slowly accepting a new baseline. I noticed it one morning while making coffee. The kettle whistled sharply, and instead of jolting, I barely reacted. The sound registered and passed. No adrenaline, no spike of alertness, just noise. I stood there holding my mug, stunned by how ordinary it felt. Ordinary had once been dangerous. Days started to arrange themselves around preference instead of preparedness. I chose when to leave the house based on weather, not avoidance. I picked restaurants because I liked them, not because they were easy to escape from. I made plans without calculating emotional cost. These were small things. They added up. The house changed with me. Elijah's home had always been safe, but now it felt alive in a way it hadn't before. I opened windows more often. Let light sit where it wanted. I stopped keeping every room pristine, as if mess would somehow invite chaos back in. I learned that control and safety are not the same thing. Some evenings, I caught myself waiting for a phone call that never came. Not from Marcus or LaToya. From the part of my past that always demanded attention. The part that said, "Stay alert, something's coming." Nothing came. That was when peace stopped feeling like a break between storms and started feeling like weather, consistent, predictable. I filled my time slowly, intentionally, not with distractions, but with experiences that had no utility beyond enjoyment. Long walks, late dinners, books I read without trying to extract lessons from them. I stopped explaining myself to people who didn't need an explanation. When someone misunderstood me, I let it stand. That was new. Before, misunderstanding felt dangerous, like it could spiral into abandonment or punishment if left unchecked. Now, it felt neutral. People could interpret me however they wanted. It no longer changed who I was. That shift created space I hadn't known I was missing. I began volunteering at a community center near my house, helping with mentorship programs. Not because I wanted to fix anyone, but because I wanted to be present, to offer stability without control, support without expectation. I recognized pieces of myself in some of the kids there. The watchfulness, the maturity that comes from being forced to grow up too fast. I didn't tell them my story. I didn't need to. Sometimes, just being a consistent adult in the room was enough. One afternoon, a girl asked me why I always seemed calm. The question caught me off guard. I wasn't always, I said honestly. She nodded like that made sense and went back to her work. That exchange stayed with me. Calm, I realized, wasn't something I performed. It was something I lived into. Something that grew the longer it went uninterrupted. My therapist noticed the change too. Sessions shifted from processing trauma to discussing goals. Not survival goals, life goals. What do you want? She asked one day. The question no longer terrified me. I want a life that doesn't require armor, I said. She smiled. You're building it. The future stopped looking like something I had to defend against. I didn't plan contingencies for worst-case scenarios anymore. I planned vacations, projects, possibilities. That doesn't mean fear vanished completely. It means fear no longer drove. I understood then that peace isn't the absence of memory. It's the absence of domination. The past existed, but it didn't command my choices. One evening, I sat on the back steps of the house, watching the sky darken, and realized I wasn't waiting for anything. No resolution, no apology, no reckoning. Everything that needed to happen already had. Peace had become routine. And routine, when you've lived in chaos, feels like a quiet miracle. If you're watching this and realizing that calm doesn't have to be earned, type "I'm learning this" in the comments. Justice didn't arrive with satisfaction. That surprised me. For most of my life, I imagined justice as something sharp, vindicating, loud enough to drown out the years of silence. I thought it would feel like winning, like balance being restored through force. Instead, justice arrived quietly, almost politely, and asked me if I was done carrying things that were never mine. The legal process wrapped itself up without ceremony. Final filings, closed motions, archived records. No dramatic final hearing. No speech from a judge about morality or redemption. Just stamped documents and a sense of finality that didn't demand applause. Andrew called one last time. "It's finished," he said. "Everything's closed." I thanked him and hung up, then sat there waiting for the emotional wave I assumed would follow. It didn't. What I felt instead was relief so subtle it almost escaped notice. Like loosening a grip you didn't realize you'd been holding for years. For so long, justice had been external. Something I was waiting for, systems and people to deliver. Now it was internal. A recalibration. I no longer needed my parents to admit what they did. I no longer needed the world to label them villains. The facts existed. The records existed. The truth was anchored outside my body. That was enough. The absence of drama allowed me to see something clearly for the first time. Justice isn't about making harm visible forever. It's about making it visible long enough that it stops controlling the future. Marcus and Latoya faded from my life, not with confrontation, but with irrelevance. Their names stopped appearing in my inbox. Their actions stopped influencing my decisions. Their existence became a background fact instead of a foreground threat. That shift mattered more than any punishment ever could. I noticed it one afternoon while standing in line at a coffee shop. Someone behind me raised their voice sharply into a phone. My body didn't tense. I didn't turn around. I didn't prepare an exit. Nothing inside me reacted. That's when I understood that justice had reached my nervous system. Justice had taught my body it didn't need to stay on alert. I stopped measuring my days by productivity. Stopped equating worth with usefulness. Stopped apologizing for taking up space in conversations, rooms, and relationships. I began choosing people who didn't require me to explain myself. Friendships shifted naturally. Some deepened. Some fell away without conflict. I let that happen without interpreting it as failure. That was new too. For years, loss had felt like something I'd done wrong. Now, it felt like alignment. The mentoring work at the community center became more meaningful as I allowed myself to be present rather than performative. I didn't try to rescue anyone. I didn't position myself as proof of survival. I just showed up. There's a particular look people get when they realize they don't need to earn kindness. I saw it again and again. That recognition was contagious. It reinforced something in me. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about restoration, not of the past, but of agency. One evening, I found myself going through old boxes I'd never opened. Things I'd packed years ago and carried from place to place without ever touching. Inside were childhood drawings, school reports, photos from before the mall. I looked at them without dissociating, without shrinking, without rewriting the story. That felt like a quiet victory. I didn't destroy the items. I didn't ritualize them. I put them back, then put the box away. The past didn't need to be erased or honored ceremonially. It just needed to be integrated. The house felt different too. Not as a sanctuary from harm, but as a place that supported life. I invited people over, laughed loudly, let messes exist without fixing them immediately. That openness felt radical. I realized then that justice had given me permission to be ordinary, to live without constantly proving resilience, to stop narrating my life as a series of survival moments. Ordinary used to scare me. Now it felt like success. If you're still listening and something in this part feels grounding instead of dramatic, type "This makes sense" in the comments. The story didn't end the way people expect stories like this to end. There was no final confrontation, no tearful apology, no moment where everyone suddenly understood what they'd done. It ended when I stopped needing it to continue. That realization came on an ordinary morning. I was standing in the kitchen, barefoot, sunlight cutting across the counter, waiting for coffee to finish brewing. Nothing dramatic was happening, no memories intruding, no old scripts running in my head, just quiet. And that was when it hit me. This is my life now. Not a recovery arc, not a survival story, not a reaction to something terrible, a life. For a long time, I thought healing would feel like closure. Like everything would finally make sense, line up neatly, resolve. But real healing doesn't tie things into a bow. It loosens them until they no longer constrict. I didn't forgive Marcus and LaToya in the way movies depict forgiveness. I didn't reach some enlightened state where their actions felt acceptable or understandable. What I did instead was release them from relevance. They no longer shaped my decisions. They no longer lived in my nervous system. They no longer occupied space in my future. That was freedom. The past didn't disappear. It stopped demanding attention. I still remember the mall, the fountain, the sound of water. But those memories feel distant now, like a photograph you've seen enough times that it no longer carries charge. They exist. They don't dominate. That distinction matters. Elijah used to tell me something when I was a teenager, back when I asked too many questions about why people do what they do. Understanding isn't the same as excusing, he'd say. And closure isn't something people give you. It's something you decide you're done waiting for. I didn't fully understand that then. I do now. The house became a place of living, not processing. I hosted dinners. I laughed loudly. I left dishes in the sink overnight without feeling anxious. I stopped treating calm like a temporary loan. Ordinary days stacked up. That's how a life gets built. Not through milestones, but through repetition. I stopped telling the story unless someone needed it. Not because I was hiding it, but because it no longer defined me. It became part of my history, not my identity. People sometimes ask if I regret pursuing accountability. No, accountability didn't break my family. It revealed it, and it gave me something I'd never had before. Choice. Choice in who I let close. Choice in how I respond. Choice in what I carry forward. I didn't become harder. I became clearer. Clear about what love looks like. Clear about what safety requires. Clear about the difference between loyalty and self-erasure. That clarity changed everything. The mentoring work continued quietly. I never positioned myself as an example. I didn't need to. Presence was enough. Consistency was enough. Kids don't need perfect adults. They need reliable ones. I learned that from Elijah. Some evenings, I still sit on the back steps and watch the sky change colors. I don't rush the moment. I don't think about what comes next. I let it be what it is. That, more than anything else, tells me the story is finished, not because nothing else will ever happen, but because this chapter no longer needs to explain itself. Justice CTA. If you believe accountability matters more than appearances, type justice in the comments. If you've ever stopped waiting for someone else to validate your pain, share what you're comfortable sharing below. And if you want more real stories about breaking cycles, choosing yourself, and building a life that doesn't revolve around survival, subscribe. You weren't weak for enduring. You were strong for ending the pattern. And choosing peace wasn't giving up. It was choosing yourself.